What's up, guys? This is Takatoshi Shibayama, the host of Future Design Podcast. When it comes to career choices, I hear a lot of debate on whether being a generalist or a specialist is better. In this fast-moving world, where one profession fades out and new ones being created, being a jack of all trades has its benefits. I do feel like keeping a broad range of interests, experimenting, and changing courses now and then are essential to finding your true passion and maintaining it. In this episode, I have Dustin Miller, the Polymath Polycast host, talk to us about the mindset of people who are multi-disciplinary and highly specialized in many different fields. What can we absorb from their ethos and how they come about being one? So without further ado, here is Dustin Miller. So thank you for being on the show, Dustin Miller, the PolyInnovator. You've done many episodes. You told me it was 72 episodes on interviewing different polymaths, and it would be really interesting to understand what their minds are thinking, when they become polymaths and what it is to become a polymath. So first of all, just thank you for being on our show.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome, dude. And as I said, 72 episodes is a great achievement. You've picked on many different minds. So before we start out talking about what polymaths are and stuff, let's talk about you. Who is Dustin Miller that's been doing all these podcasts?
Well, and I started doing the Polycast a while back when it came to exploring different aspects of Intera, like on your show here, the internal aspects. And these very people I've been talking to, these multidisciplinary people, I wouldn't call them all polymaths. I would say that. And so I went into this thinking like entrepreneurs and polymaths and innovators. And the reason why I was so attracted by all these innovative people is that I've always wanted to be an innovator. I've always wanted to make a change in the world. And I started my first brand ages ago called the United Living Construct to create a hub of innovation. And then eventually kind of fizzled out and evolved into my personal brand, PolyInnovator. And so I wanted to build a foundation for all the various careers that I knew I wanted to have in my life. I wanted to work in education and create something through there. I especially wanted to work in smart city development down the line, even gaming and music at some point as well. And I realized if I were to get a degree for all of those, I'd be spending all my years in school rather than doing things. And so I decided, okay, well, screw it. I'm going to create my own degree, my do-it-yourself education. And that way I can modify it when I need to pivot to a new phase of PolyInnovator or my life.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think education is not just about going to school. You have so many different softwares out there that provides free education. And frankly, the internet has uploaded all of humanity's knowledge there, right? So, whatever you want to know, it's always there. I mean, when I was in school, I had to go to a library, and this is probably different from you because, probably a couple of years, couple decades older than you. But, when I had to do my university thesis or whenever, it was, high school or whatever, I had to go to a library, go through the catalog and find the book that I need. And I had to go through so many books to get to the one that I actually needed. Right now, type it in and it's right there. So right now it's a great moment for humanity because the whole knowledge of humanity is right there on the internet, and it's so easy to learn about things. And what you're doing right now is trying to come up with different types of educational models so that you can learn so many more things than before, from my generation and older. So what are the things that really sparked you in this idea that you want to learn so many different things? Because it has to come from curiosity.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think all these wealth of resources online, Gutenberg, which is a website where you can download books, just updated and has a whole new UI and a whole much more books. And it's one of those things where even if you spend all your time on that site getting books, where do you start? How do you consume it all? How do you organize it all? And then there's Coursera for courses, edX for courses, YouTube for videos, Spotify for podcasts. So many resources. Where do you start? How do you organize it? Well, you can't. There is no way of doing it right now. I know Degreed is working on something which is interesting, similar to what I'm trying to do too with what I call the modular degree, this do-it-yourself, self-curated education where you're organizing it into a consumable list of stuff to do or a degree-like pattern. And I know there's other people like Laurie Picard who created the no pay MBA, or Scott Young who had his MIT challenge almost a decade ago. And these people who organize their own education with online resources. but they were very niche. Like Scott's was MIT's computer science, and hers was MBA. I think that some people are going to want something more divergent. People like myself, people like you, who I had on my show as well. So thank you for coming on. All these people who have these multidisciplinary traits and want to pursue their hobbies or new skills or pivot careers. Where do they start? How do they want to make their own degree? And so that's what I wanted to go for, is create a system that people could create their own.
Yeah, I think right now in this world, I think Peter Thiel was talking about this, about education, and then, a university degree is not really about going to a university and learning something, but it's what you get out of it. It's the certificate that you graduated from a certain university, right? It's a piece of paper, and the knowledge there can be taken from anywhere. I mean, even if you go to Harvard or MIT, you can learn the same stuff from another university at the same quality, or even online if you really spend your time in digging through all the material that's out there in the world. But what makes learning unique is that right now we can curate it to our own needs, right? It's not about what the teacher can tell us. It's about finding what you want to learn. And I think that's what education is supposed to be. Seek your curiosity and find what you really want. And getting a degree, getting a certificate is just to show people that you have something, right? It's just a vindication of like you've done something, and it doesn't really mean anything, because if you go out in the world, there's so much more you got to learn anyway. And then it's about continuous education. And right now with we talk about AI disrupting jobs, and everybody has to upskill and reskill. I mean, this is a theme that will go on, from now on, right? We always need to continue educating ourselves. And I think what you're trying to do is, apply that kind of thinking forward, right? I mean, how do you actually continue or allow people to continue their curiosity and to I don't like use word upskill, reskill, because it's just a hyped up word. I think it's more about seeking your knowledge and really learning about the world that's around us.
Well, and I like how you brought it up, because that's the whole point behind the modular aspect, is that I wanted to make it modular for a lifelong pattern. If you want to pursue just the degree, like, okay, I want to learn this one skill so I can get a job and prove that I know this knowledge. And I'm not sure how we're going to go about like the accreditation aspect. Like, obviously, I'm not going to be distance learning accredited, at least right away. I'm not going to have any piece of papers that are going to be worth their salt per se, but perhaps by helping people build personal brands, or helping them build portfolios, or capstone project-based learning, which a lot of people are able to adapt their knowledge much more effectively because of a project anyways. It'll help show people like, hey, this is what I've learned through this modular degree. I know it's not a piece of paper, but it might be more worthwhile that way.
Yeah. And in Singapore, I think Asia in general, and this is not specific to Singapore, it's all over in this region, is that people really want to show people that they've done something, and they value that a lot more than the actual education itself. And I've seen a lot of people say, oh, I've done this test for music. But music is not about taking a test, right? I mean, it's about learning how to play, enjoying the music, feeling the music, express your emotions. And it's not about a certificate. And I think there's too much emphasis on like trying to get a certificate or some validation that you've done something. And I think we need to break free of that, because it does kill the education the concept of it. And it's like a means to an end, right? You just do this because you want to do this, you want to get this or that, to show people that you've done something. So, what do you think, for you, education should be for future generations?
Well, for one of the inspirations behind the Polycast as well is for these polymathic people like you and I who are multidisciplinary. I wouldn't call myself a polymath, and I wouldn't consider everyone on my show polymaths. I have had polymaths on there, but I think most of them have been entrepreneurs, people like you two who are experts in a few different fields and just exploring their more generalist tendencies. And I think that there's a large portion of society that are underserved and underdeveloped even, who are these multidisciplinary people like ourselves. And we found ourselves a bit along the way, you and I, but there's other people who are more lost and who might not actually acknowledge the fact they may be a jack of all trades. They may even be a polymath without even fully realizing it. And so not only do we need to ignite that curiosity, but with a modular degree, you can make it to where you can branch out. If you want to just focus on one path, become a specialist, fine. But if you want to be a polymath and someone who's an expert in many different fields, well, you can build that out. That's what I hope from like a Lego-like education, so to speak.
Right. I mean, look, I don't think of myself as a polymath, even though you had me on your show, and I still struggle to kind of validate myself that I am. But it's interesting that you're picking up all these people who are polymaths, and they might not be the most famous people in this earth, but there are people who are not well known, maybe because it's not in their interest to be known to the world that they are multidisciplinary people. And I think that what you're doing is bringing them the light and trying to pick on their brains to understand what it is to become a polymath and their methods. So can you tell us in plain, simple words what you, after all these 72 episodes that you've done, what is it? What is a polymath?
Well, and that's something I'm still working on because I still have more people to come and I want to compile all people's answers on the question I asked. And like I said, not everyone is on the show is a polymath, but they still understand the idea of like being multidisciplinary and pursuing that. And some of the biggest themes I've seen is obviously indulging in your curiosity. People who are polymathic are curious. They're focusing on what do I want to know and how do I learn it and actually going about doing it versus just saying, oh, I'm curious about that, but I'm not going to actually do anything about it. Beyond that, a polymath is someone who's many learnings and actually being able to dig deep into many different areas. They're not just a specialist, but they're a multi-specialist. And there's people like Michael Araki or Angela Cautalesa who have done actual papers on it and studying how becoming a polymath. And when I talked to Angela on the show, her dissertation was about polymathy. And she interviewed people who she considered polymaths and asked them various different questions. And it's interesting how it really does come down to a deep level of knowledge in many different areas, and they don't have to be related. In fact, Leonardo da Vinci, who's a prime example of like a true polymath, he was an artist, a sculptor, an engineer. He was building cities. He designed the first smart city even. People don't even realize that. He designed the world's first parachute and an underwater suit, all kinds of crazy things. He was definitely a polymath. He designed his art through his knowledge of architecture and physics and actually understanding the geometric lines. So it's fascinating.
Yeah. I think in our modern society, we've focused too much on specializing in one thing and then creating a job out of it. And, before, as you said, Da Vinci didn't have a real profession per se, right? I mean, he painted, he invented things, he thought about many different things because he was not categorized into a certain job, and he was able to pursue whatever he wanted. Of course, he probably needed the financial means to do it, but there was no such thing as I do this because I'm this kind of person and I do this job. And I think right now, because of our education system, our schools are printing out people who they want to design as workers for this modern society, right? And they want to, create people so that they become obedient citizens of the world, that they go to work and do their 9 to 5 or whatever and come back home. And I think that really killed off a lot of people's curiosity about the world. And I think that we need to go back to it. And maybe this whole movement around disrupting jobs with AI and all that things might be a way for us to go back to that kind of world where we can be, and I'm being very utopian about this idea right now. I mean, obviously I have my deep concerns about AI, but I think, if I were to look at a good side of it, is that we can finally be able to pursue what we want to do without having the balls and chains of having gone to work and to do a specific task every day.
Right. And ignoring things like the singularity and overall like AI going evil and going rogue, those kind of extremes, I do think that AI itself is not disrupting jobs in a negative way. Sure, we're losing the lower level jobs right now, but the ecosystem that's going to come forth out of that, like I said about the master's degree, I want it to be Lego-like. Well, I do think that you have to have someone pushing you in a direction, whether that's a mentor or AI. It doesn't really matter. I do think that the mentor could also help use AI to help have a personal touch to it, because the AI might come up with the ideas, okay, well, you like these courses when you're probably going to like this. And someone mentioned to me when I was talking to an educator is that sometimes the best learning we have is a class that we may not actually know we want. Steve Jobs didn't know that he wanted to learn typography until he took a calligraphy class. And that's what, after he quit college, that's after he dropped out and just walked into the class and started doing calligraphy. And so that was a class that was sprung upon him. And actually, he didn't sign up for it, didn't want to do it. He just found curiosity and went for it. And I think that with AI, I can see like, hey, you're missing this skill. Well, you're just like, I don't want to learn that skill. Well, the AI can tell you should learn it. And the mentor could help communicate that and say, hey, you should probably try this out. If it doesn't work, it's modular. Go try something else, but try it out. Then you fall in love with it and it becomes your new career for all we know.
Yeah, I think right now the AI algorithms out there are only spinning out things that you already have interest in, and I think the algorithms need to be able to, direct you in a different direction than where you're going, and I think that goes for social media, Netflix and Spotify and all those kind of things, is that they always give you the same thing or similar things because they know a specific thing about you that you might have a personal taste for it. But I think that we need a different technology to diversify ourselves. We need to get out of our own, very narrow idea of personal taste and explore the world. And I think that's what's starting to lose a lot more than before, and that's what I think. The modern education that we had at least gave us various different options. I mean, they taught us science, they taught us literature, they taught us math, all these things. But then now with these particular AI algorithms that we have now, is like, oh, you like this, pursue more. So it makes us more specified in a certain topic that we have personal interest, which is not bad, because we could go really deep into a certain thing. And I use a lot of social media to do that. I feed a lot of my personal interest to it so I could get more out of it. But the thing is,
ads and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that, there is we're talking about a lot about this social dilemma, that Netflix documentary that came out and saying the algorithm is always going to give you a certain thing. But the thing is, if you can take that to your advantage and say, I want to learn specifically about this thing, and you feed your algorithms so that you could get more and more of it. Like, for instance, like I have a huge interest in jiu-jitsu, because that's what I practice. I have a huge interest in ancient civilizations, so I want to know more about it. So all I do is like look at those things so I could get more and interesting stuff out of it, or like music. So I think that's actually heading to us in a very good way, in a specific way, but it doesn't allow us to be more diversified, more polymathic, mindset, give us that polymathic mindset for us to be interested in different things.
Well, and I think some people think it's completely inherent or completely not. I think that it's a little bit of both, where for me it's more inherent. I wanted to do many things from a young age, and I understood that even from a young age. May not understood how to do it, and I definitely got fought against to do it, but I understood that I want to do many different things. I held 6 different positions for the first couple of years of my first employment, no less, and that was natural for me. But there's also people who become polymathic. Roger Federer is like a world famous tennis player, but he was a dabbler. Like, this comes from David Epstein's Range, where he was talking about Roger and how he did almost like 30 different sports before he actually finalized on tennis. And it was because of his dabbling that made him so good at what he finally decided to do as a specialist. And then as you get older too, you often either get too old for a sport or get bored of that particular engineering degree that you had, and then you spread out again. So it's almost like a funnel where when you're a jack of all trades, you're like, okay, I want to try different things, put my hands in different cookie jars, find what you like, and then you become a master at it, and then opens back up later down the line.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I could kind of understand that because, when I was younger too, I had a specific interest in history, and all I wanted to do was learn history, but I was good at, different things. I had a huge interest in music, sports, and all these things. And I had, a wide range of things. But then as I got older, I needed to, specialize in something. So I started to specialize in a few different things. But as now in my 40s, now I'm starting to open up again because I know that I have a little bit more time to do other things, and then I can kind of get back some of the curiosity that I had before to learn more things about different things again. And I think that's also comes with age, but I think also it comes with the way that we can create time for ourselves. And I think that's what's also missing in our life, is that we're too busy. Even though we might think that, we have time to look at our, phones and pass time or something, play games or whatever. But I think that, time is the most valuable thing. And because we have time, we have the capacity to like pursue different interests. And I think that, I think from your interviews with these polymaths is that they do create their own time to learn about different things, because otherwise they won't be able to do that. I mean, you can't cram everything in a very short time span. So, let's talk about time in that aspect. I mean, you've done these interviews. How did they become able to like pursue these different interests? Because it is in a modern society, we don't have that much time if you're too focused on, making a living or, caring for a family, and you think you don't have time.
Two things. First off, like you just said there, you think you don't have enough time, but in actuality, you do. You don't have to sit there and watch Netflix or go on Disney Plus and watch The Mandalorian or see the new Game of Thrones episodes when they're coming out. All these different shows battling for your time and all the habits you have, the systems you have in place, that's where a lot of it runs down to. You probably have some bad habits you can kink out and have a few more hours per day. And then if you have a family, sure, that takes up a lot of time, but eventually your kids are going to grow up a little bit and have their own school and have your time back again. So I don't think that necessarily has too much of an impact. I think what happens is our societal norms. Something else you touched on earlier is that since the Industrial Revolution, we've been kind of forced into this specialist mindset. And David Epstein also talks about how specialism is for ants. Like becoming a specialist is for ants, for insects, because that's what they have to do. We're human beings. We're multimodal. We have different mental models and different aspects behind our existence, our curiosity to do many different things. Like I said earlier, I think there's a lot of subset of the population who are underdeveloped because they are more polymathic by nature. But I think we all are to a certain degree. We're all generalists by nature, and then we specialize for whatever role we're needed in society for. And if you look at the Ikigai, for example, what you're good at, what the world needs, what you can get paid for, and what you enjoy doing, well, not all of those are going to be the same thing. That's at least 4 areas of your life that if they're not all being the same thing, that's 4 areas of your life that all come together. Well, you have to spend time doing those things. Eventually, if you work it out, you can find your Ikigai, and that becomes one specialty. But maybe you have to be a polymath to find it, or be a polymath to even do it. And I think that too, beyond the 9-to-5 role, because we're talking all the way across the planet here. It's almost 9 p.m. for me here. I'm waking up now. This is my time where I start to be really excited and woken up and that kind of thing. And so for you, it's also like morning. And so the 9-to-5 doesn't work. You know what I mean? It doesn't seem to work for our new globalized society, so to speak. I think we have to have a new model for work and how we approach time and how we approach our own habits.
Yeah, the societal construct makes us become specialized, and I think that that's some, the norm that we really need to challenge ourselves, because yes, you have to go out and earn a living and provide for your family, but you have limited time on this earth, and you have limited time as being a human being to spend 80 or 90 years in this life, and you have to make the most of it. And I think about that quite a lot ever since I was a kid, because time is in a way short, even though I feel it's been quite long for me, but it is quite short. And
you're still very young.
Yeah, I know. I kind of like, I'm trying to not think that I'm old because I'm just looking at you. But yeah, so in that short time span that we have, I mean, we can make so much impact. And I was talking to another person that potentially could be one of our guests, and we were talking about what is it that ticks us, and what is it that makes us happy, what is it that makes us alive. And I think that's one thing that we really need to start thinking about again, and especially during this time that we're in right now. We're confined to our houses most of the time, and we start to realize that, hey, actually you don't need to work that long hours to perform our tasks, right? And then you have this extra time, and you're not going to go spend it on social media or like Netflix and all that stuff. And what are you going to do with that time? And I think that this is a time to really think about what it is that we want out of this life. and how do we want to spend that time, and think about the quality of time. And I think that, what so tell us, like, from all the polymaths that you spoke to, or maybe some of them are not, but what is it that they are really determined to do in this life?
Many of them are striving to make a change as well. And like I said, like not all of them are polymaths, or some of them are extreme specialists. One of the person I had on was a quantum researcher, and she was focused on that. But the reason why I thought she would be a good guest for the show is that not only is she a quantum physicist, so to speak, and she's also a content creator. She was also a programmer. She was also someone who was doing presentations and stuff like that. And so there's plenty of different aspects to her life that made her multidisciplinary. Well, she's probably an expert in a few different fields, but she's still not a polymath level yet. Polymath is someone with like expert level in many different areas. And so I think that in order to become something like that and have the time to expel all that interest in many different areas, you have to create systems and create ways of organizing your time. Just as you're speaking there, it made me think of time blocking, and there's always deep work. In fact, that particular guest I had on, Anastasia, she mentioned deep work as a big motivator for her by Cal Newport. And I think it's interesting how when you want to spread yourself so thin, as some people say, I think that you have to have yourself be really organized. I do think that a lot of people become polymaths by doing one thing right after the other, but there's also a subset of polymathic people who do a jack of all trades approach, where they do all the hands in different cookie jars and they don't focus. They just keep doing different hands in the cookie jars, and all 4, 5, 8 cookie jars end up growing at the same rate. Even if it's slower, at some point they're all going to be at a higher level.
Interesting. It kind of, I'm the type that actually I need to focus on one thing and then just do that for a long while and then move on to another thing. And I find that people who can multitask at the same time, I know people who can read different books at, one go. And those are things that I don't have the capacity to do. I don't know how to multitask in that way. But, for people who can do that, what is their approach to doing multiple things at one time? Because I find that pretty difficult to do.
Well, here's the deal. Humans can't multitask. We're single function brain people. Like we can only do one thing at a time. But that doesn't mean that in a more macro scale, you can divulge into other curiosities and do other things as well. Right now, I'm recording this with you. After this, I'm going to go finish some of the stuff from my latest episode. Well, then I also need to work on my website, my new one that I just built. And I also need to go play some video games at some point to relax. And I'll also go teach something tomorrow at the gym. And so I'm doing many different things, but it's not like I'm doing them all at once. And I think a lot of people get that confused. There's something I want to say, because I think a lot of people get this confused. The jack of all trades, master of none. But that's not the full saying. The full saying also continues to say, but also sometimes better than a master of one. Because when you are a jack of all trades, you see the interdisciplinary knowledge, the transferable skills between these different pillars of knowledge, or trees, as I like to call them. And those trees branch together. And that's one thing I was talking with Abhishek Lahori, who we were talking about the forest of knowledge, so to speak, and how you're building up these different trees. Well, at some point, those trees are going to interact, and you're going to find a new innovative path between them. But also, too, it becomes easy to learn those newer skills, because then you have more to pull from all these different trees. You have different aspects behind that deep level of knowledge in one area that actually transfer over to another one.
Interesting. I guess when you start learning about something, then something sparks you, so you can't really design it the way you actually wanted to. I mean, you just have to go with the flow and then seek what your curiosity leads you to. And I think that's really important as well, because a lot of times you think you know what you want, but you don't. And you have to allow yourself that capacity, the space to figure out who you are and what your interests are, and let yourself flow, like the free flowing of life, right? I mean, you have to flow with that. And yeah, I think a lot of people just kind of stop at certain things and then just say, okay, well, I've done this, so I'll just move on to something else, and I'll think about it. But if you pursue something even deeply, then you don't have to think about it. It just comes natural to you.
Yeah. And I sort of agree and disagree when it comes to the go with the flow kind of thing. I think that you can be polymath and go with the flow and that kind of thing, but you're going to be more of a multi-potentialite. Someone who has the potential to do many different things, but is you have to really do that much. But the difference between a multi-potentialite and a polymath is someone who has done very much in many different areas. And I think that in order to do so, you do have to have systems. Like I've been creating a life operating system, as August Bradley calls it, in Notion, Notion.so, where it's a tool that combines databases and documents and Kanban boards and even Gantt charts all into one cohesive system that you can link together. And you can create this almost second brain, like Tiago Forte talks about as well, and putting it all together. And that way you have a organized system. Okay, this is what I need to work on then. This is how I do it then. And when you have systems like that, or the Zettelkasten, and all these different examples that are keywords that people can look up when they hear this, but I think that a lot of like Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, that was his kind of way of having his system. That was the best system they could have at the time. Now with technology, we have Coda, we have Notion, we have Rome, we have all these different other project management tools. There's a whole crap ton out there that you can use to organize your life. And so I don't think it's necessarily going with the flow per se. It could be going with what your interests lie, but more so like, okay, what do I need to focus on today in the micro, and what do I need to focus on in the macro? I have a little fireside micro polycast talking about macro and micro focus even.
Yeah, let's dive into that a little bit more. So when you say like, focus on the micro, but then also think about the macro. I mean, I think that in my kind of understanding of that is that you want to have like a kind of big picture, bird's eye view of like what you want to achieve. But then, you kind of make these subsets of things that you really need to focus on to get to that expert level of understanding. And is that the way that everybody kind of frames it?
Well, and I think that regardless if you're a generalist or a specialist, you should probably frame it like that, because at this point you need to have the head in the clouds, but also your hands in the mud and doing stuff. I feel like I'm not working fast enough right now when I'm getting all my projects done. I'm working on things every day. You were talking to me before the episode that I actually decided to focus on consistency when I did these interviews. And so around July-ish, I just started doing them every week. No, actually around June, I decided, okay, I was releasing them basically as I got them done. It was kept going them out. It's like, okay, I need to have a little bit more of a reliant system and have consistency so people can expect it. Let's do one a week. I was recording them so fast that by the time I got to 20, it was already like October. And then when I got to 30, it was starting to basically get to November. And I was like, okay, there's literally another 40 people, including you, who are waiting on me to get this out there. And I was doing stuff every single day. I was working on the episodes. I was doing the other 3 series that I have for my Polycast, as well as all the other content I'm creating. And so I was working on that micro content every day, but the macro is out of whack. Because basically your episode that you had on wouldn't come out till next year if we were to keep doing that same route. So my macro was messed up. I had to reevaluate, and I decided about 2 weeks ago, I was like, screw it. Let's just do daily so I can get them all out. People can be happy. Not to mention too, technically daily is consistency. Let's see if that works. And so I reevaluated my macro and basically changed my micro because of it.
Right. Yeah, I guess, you need to have a systematic approach to a lot of things, but, you always need to pivot in sometimes, right? And when do they really decide that they need to pivot? Because I think a lot of people get really accustomed to like a certain way of doing things and they get really stuck on that. So, you need to have that flexibility to switch what you're doing.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the kind of point there where the people get used to it. And so you need to pivot basically when things stop working. That old system wasn't working for me anymore. It worked for a while, but then I needed to pivot. And it's interesting too, because my Omni content is my main series, or I call it my main series, but I created a hell of a lot more Polycasts than I have my Omni content. But the Omni content I was wanting to do at the beginning of the year every single day, which, just for people who don't know about it, I create a blog post, I turn that into a slideshow, I record over that and create a video, then I take the audio out and make a Polycast. It was built with content repurposing and omni-channel content in mind. Problem was I didn't have the right tools, like I was talking to you before the episode about the right tools and the right systems in place. So at this point, I've only made 5 all year, which is ridiculous. And so I was focusing on so much at the beginning of the year, trying to get this out. It's like, well, this is not working. I need to pivot. And I tried doing other things. Eventually, I came across Matchmaker, which is how we came across each other. And that tool is what helped me get all these people on my show and get started that way. And so I made a pivot and changed. So you just have to find things that are not working and then change them and constantly iterate your life.
And with the other guests that you always had with these poly-innovators, what is also like some other common traits that you found that think that you can, even normal people can apply to their everyday lives?
Yeah, you had a Freudian slip right there. You're saying poly-innovators. Now, so when it comes to things that people can apply, in addition to the Polycast, I created what I call the personal poly innovation system. And this actually started out as just self-eduvement, which is just a combination of self-education, self-improvement, and self-development. And I think that's something that most people think are, oh, those mean all the same thing. But in actuality, they don't. They mean more detailed than that. Self-education is that autodidactic, that self-learning, and just trying to find a new skill. If you want to go learn how to blog or learn how to create a podcast, well, you have to teach yourself first. You're not going to be able to find a mentor, let alone anything else, until you teach yourself what you can learn in a library or on Google. The next step would be the self-improvement. So we're talking about systems. Well, systems only form when you have a habit. Habits only can continuously form if you have a system. So it's a little cycle there where habits and systems really are conducive to your continuous improvement, that 1% or 1 to 4% every day, so to speak. And that's a little kind of joke for the flow people out there, people who love the flow state. But and the next aspect would be the self-development up here. So the self-development is more complicated. It's the 4 pillars, as I call them: the mind, the body, the spirit, and emotions, which I think is very important for Intera, where when you try to find a balance between all 4 of those areas, it really leads to exponential growth. So you have the foundation of self-education, the continuous improvement of self-improvement, and the exponentiality of self-development.
Yeah, and since you talked about mind and emotions, and what are some of the habits that people do outside of their learning habits, what they do to keep themselves at top speed?
Top speed. Well, let's just think of it in a simple way. The mind-body connection is probably the strongest to go off of at first. And so a lot of people will pursue their mental pillar, mind pillar, so to speak, when it comes to getting a degree and going to school. Or maybe my personal satisfaction of going on Google deep dives and rabbit holes and learning things. When I want to learn something, I'll go on Google Images, Google Search, and Google Videos and open up a couple hundred tabs and just dive right in. And so that's one way of kind of boosting your knowledge. But there's also things like stimulus. So playing Tetris to train the brain at being faster, hand-eye coordination of playing Call of Duty, for example. That kind of stimulus, so to speak, to build the neuroplasticity and new connections and synapses in the brain. And then for the body, people can go to the gym and build themselves up. And I think it's just being able to simplify these pillars into actionable tasks that you can do every day or however often you want to do it. And those eventually form into systems. Like, for example, I work at a recreation center as a day job. Well, I have a system there. When I work, I can go work out. It's a nice way of just habit stacking onto that work. And so when the pandemic hit, actually, I was kind of screwed because I stopped working and stopped working out at the same time because I lost the job at that particular point. And so it's like, okay, you have to really keep iterating because I lost my habit and my system at the same time. I couldn't rely on one or the other to build the other back up. In that case, you need to just focus on doing it again and again and kind of snowballing it again.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, no, it does. And, I find that also, setting up your systems so that you can continuously, train yourself, your mind, your body. And what about some of the spiritual things that people do to, kind of uplift themselves, be in that kind of state where they can learn more things, be creative?
Yeah. So spirituality, I think in a basic sense, you can tack on religion to it, you can tack on philosophy to it, but I like to see it as the bridge between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. So you have the lower primal, more emotional mind, or the reptilian mind, so to speak, and then the lizard brain, as Seth Godin calls it, and then you have the higher mind, the higher conscious. And a lot of times when people get into the state of flow, for example, that hyperfrontality, the prefrontal cortex shuts down and you start to be just one with yourself. That's one kind of spiritual experience you can have, but that's also a mental pillar thing too. And so finding the connections between different pillars, I think, is a good way to build into spirituality. But meditation, I'm sure you talked about on your show quite a bit in Terra. And I think meditation is a great way to build both the spirit and the mind pillar, and not necessarily just clear your mind, but more of like be present in that moment and try to understand what thoughts are you having. Why are you having that thought? And digging deeper and deeper. Why? Ask the 5 whys.
I see. And also we in this entire podcast, we also talk about not just meditation or spirituality, but the philosophies that we have for life. And that kind of goes in with all the technology that we're dealing with at the moment. And I know you had a lot of entrepreneurs in the tech space. You talked about Anastasia doing quantum computing and physics. I mean, those people who are in that kind of technology space, I think that the importance of handling technology is that you have the right mindset to handle technology. And I talked about this so many times, but technology can always lead us to utopian or dystopian future, and it really depends on the people who are handling it, right? And technology is just a blank state, and then we are the ones that actually give it color. And the people that you've been talking to, and you handle a lot of technology as well, is that what is their kind of mindset that they go into when they start dealing with the technology that they're dealing with?
What do you mean? Like, in what way?
Well, do they have like a certain ethical principle when they go into doing their business, doing their research?
I think that it's pretty similar to what you've talked to with a guest on your show, where it's a matter of trying to find the new innovations. And that's what I think was key, is that when you try to find the bridge between two different knowledge areas, it's a great way of innovating. But sometimes you do need to just dig down in one tree of knowledge, or one trench, as some people refer to it as, too, analogy wise. Keep digging down into one trench. But I think that when it comes to technology in particular, if you're focusing on this one programming language, but if you look at another, it could teach you something that could have, like, let's say there's a certain loop statement or something like that in JavaScript, but you're all in Rust or C++, that you're so low level, you don't even acknowledge JavaScript as a thing. But someone built something in JavaScript that could help you tremendously in that deeper level of knowledge or deeper level of programming. And so I think that being able to take from different areas, I think that's the kind of mentality and mindset.
Now, what I was talking about is that, you need to have a certain drive, self-acclamation to achieve something in this world. And it has to come from a certain type of motivation to achieve what they're doing. And then I think, curiosity is one thing, but sometimes I feel like there's a need for some kind of moral guideline for them to pursue what they're doing. Maybe it's, they want to change the world to become a better place. I mean, are there common traits to these people? Because that's one thing that I really feel that is not emphasized enough, not talked about enough.
I think for one is the open-mindedness. When you talked about the societal norms, like you said, you had a specialized, well, at that point, it limits you, and it limits you to one type of area. And when you're more exposed to more areas, you're more open to learning even more on top of that. It's exponential at that factor. And I think that at that point, your curiosity drives you to philosophy and learning the why of things. And I think that's a big factor, is that a lot of specialists may not look at philosophy as much. And that's a generalization. I know that there's plenty out there who do, but I think that because they're people who are polymathic are more generalist, they're able to dive into philosophy much more easily, and they're able to learn more from various around the world.
Yeah. I mean, obviously when I was much younger going into finance, I didn't really have that kind of any, particular principle, but more and more I kind of dove into the world of finance, that I found that there was so much things that was lacking, and that's more about the kind of philosophical reasons why they get into finance. Do they have a specific reason that they needed to get into finance? And I went into it, as I said, I didn't have anything, so that's why I kind of felt empty while I was doing it. And do I have a specific purpose of investing in certain things, or do I have? And I really struggled to find that. And when I was doing investing in distressed companies, which means companies that are going into restructuring or some kind of bankruptcy situation, I wanted to find meaning to why I was investing in these things. I wanted to help companies that are struggling, so that the managers, the employees of that companies can continue on with their lives and make their workplace a better place. And I needed that principle to keep going, because otherwise, if there was nothing and it was only just about like, if I invest in this, I make money and I'm happy, that's like more of a gaming kind of mentality, right? And I needed something deeper than that. And then the more I dug into that meaning, I started to, if I didn't have that, there was nothing there. And that's why I feel like whether you're doing technology or education or finance or any of these things, if there's no like really why I'm doing this, I feel like there's not going to be a direction that you can head towards.
Well, Takatoshi, I think you answered your own question there when you asked me. Like, just look at yourself, for example, just how you developed. You were specialized, you were in finance, and eventually you broke into blockchain, podcasting, jujitsu, philosophy, all these different areas. And I think it's just because you found out that doing just one thing, not only for you, but I think for most people, wasn't good enough. And especially now that we have the resources online. I was talking to, I think, Eric Wallace, and we're talking about the modern renaissance through the internet, because it's interesting how this new technology is changing how we are. And something you mentioned with AI, I think that there is a point of human touch to it. Like you said, the color aspect. And something that kept coming to my brain that I want to mention is the information architecture. I think that you mentioned earlier how right now it's based on certain data points. Well, I think in order for AI to evolve farther, it has to do with the information architecture of it and how we organize, how we structure things. And that's one reason why I love using Notion, because I can be able to build my own architecture that way versus Windows, folders and items and folders and items. And so there might be some aspect behind the why that will help the how, if that helps at all.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think, this podcast really focuses on the why rather than the how. And because it's not a business podcast, it's not a entrepreneur podcast, I don't really talk about like how they're doing things, but why they're doing things. And that's the main focus of our conversation as well, is that why do we have to become a polymath? Why do we seek the knowledge hungerness that we have? What's the ends to that? What are we trying to achieve in order to become that?
Well, and I would say that there is no reason why you should become a polymath unless you really want to. I know there's plenty of people who are like me, who are multidisciplinary, or like you as well, but they're not necessarily wanting to become polymaths. They're happy at their state. They're happy, and maybe that'll change. I think that there's some people who I've talked to either on the show or just outside the show who are generalist level, kind of like a middle competency level, who are very smart individuals, but they haven't necessarily delved into many different areas to a specialty state or expert level. And I think that for them, they're happy, they're content. And if they're content there, then there's no reason to become a polymath. But if there is people who want to pursue farther, who want to do more or innovate more or make a change in the world, I think that becoming a polymath is a great foundation for their reason for being. If they want to pursue their Ikigai, well, then maybe you need to become a polymath in order to get to that step, to that level that you need to be.
Yeah. No, I definitely think about Ikigai more than before, and it's funny that the Japanese word Ikigai has broken into the global scene, rather than just sushi and sashimi and all that stuff, and Kaizen as well. I love the fact that a lot of people are thinking about this now, because I think there's a reason why like certain words like this actually make it out into the global scene, is that there's no other word to explain things. And maybe you can replace that with passion, but passion is like only half of Ikigai, right? Because it's a reason to live. And that's something that I guess people don't have, or they just felt that they didn't have. So that word, they were just looking for that word because they wanted it, and they want that Ikigai in their life. And then that's why people want to focus on that so much, because a lot of times it seems like the society is losing that. Why do we exist? Why are we here? And I think that philosophical question, ever since beginning of time, is like people are asking me, why am I here?
Well, let me touch on that then, because I get the existential terrors quite often where I'm thinking like, why are we here? What should I do? And my reason for being is more along the lines of pursuing that dream. Like, it's hard to explain. I want to help the world become a type 1 civilization on the Kardashev scale. And I think that's such an immense goal. Where do I start? Why do I think I'm good enough to do it? Well, maybe I'm not, but maybe I could spark the next person who does do it. And the reason why I get like existential terror sometimes is like there's so much to do in the world. If you look at New York, there's so many restaurants in New York that if you were to go to a new one for every single meal for over 50 years, you would still not be able to experience all the restaurants in New York, let alone the world. And so that's just one aspect of existence, eating, that we can't even fully grasp and fully do anything about. And when you think even a bigger scale, we're talking about AI and where things might end up, utopian or not, there's so much expansiveness beyond that. I finished watching a show called The Expanse recently, where the United Nations became the global government. And so it starts building out. They start moving to Mars. They start moving to the outer rim and all these different new frontiers for us. And there's so much more beyond what we can do, but we're not even anywhere close to being prepared. That's why Elon Musk and Bezos are so motivated too. They have their why because they want us to be prepared. And I think you and I are both for trying to do something in our own right as well towards that.
Yeah, I think so too. And then I think that what you're doing to bring multidisciplinary mindsets into this world is there is a huge meaning to that. And not everybody wants to be a polymath, as you say, but there are people who are pursuing that, and then giving people even hint at what people are thinking about who are polymaths and why they want to be a polymath. Maybe it's just because of curiosity, but it could be something that they find their existence in this world is to be a polymath and want to be able to make impact in this world is huge. And I just want to leave it at that note, but going forward, I mean, obviously I want the listeners to listen to your shows because you bring on so many interesting guests, and I do enjoy watching your podcast. Where can people follow you more and know about you?
Well, I mentioned earlier in the episode, I'm rebuilding my website, but the URL will stay the same. It's polyinnovator.space. And then so at PolyInnovator on basically any platform, including blockchain social networks as well. And then the show is called the Polymath Polycast, where you can find it on pretty much every podcast platform, including Podchaser and Amazon Podcast, which is new, as well as just YouTube as well. I record a video like you as well, and so that way we can get more of a visual learner as well.
All right, awesome. And is there like a final closing note that you want to share with everybody before we close this off?
Going back to the personal poly innovation system that I talked about, I think that PPS is really interesting because you can start with educating yourself on whatever new skill you want to learn, indulge that curiosity, build a habit or ritual around doing that new skill, and then try to see how it affects you in their 4 major areas of life: the mind, the body, the spirit, and emotions, and internalize that.
Awesome. All right. Well, this made a wonderful episode. Thank you very much, Dustin, for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, this is your host Takatoshi Shibayama. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Now, if you enjoyed or disliked the show, please let me know by writing in the comment section. The only way I can improve or add value to you is through your voices. If there are any topics that you would like me to pick up, please also let me know in the comments. I'd love to start chatting with you all. And if you would like to continue watching the show, please subscribe. Thank you.